Hello again, Acolytes, and welcome back to the Archives. When making his plans, Darth Sidious had originally thought himself to be so far beyond the Jedi that it was practically impossible for him to lose if he played his cards correctly. In many cases, Sidious was absolutely right. Sidious was certainly smarter, more cunning, and especially more powerful. Not only did he bring his influence over the dark side to heights beyond what most Sith in history had reached, but he also mastered the ways of all 7 forms of lightsaber combat, with his specialty being Form 7 Juyo. For the longest time, Palpatine considered himself to be unstoppable in combat, and for the large part, again, he was correct. Perhaps only 2 or 3 Jedi that we know about in the Clone Wars could actually match him at the blade or come close, one of those being his longtime rival, Master Yoda. Prior to the beginning of the Clone Wars, Sidious didn't even consider Yoda to be a threat on the battlefield, since he assumed the Jedi Master was far too old and feeble to hold his former strength in the Force. However, this perception came crashing down after the Battle of Geonosis. Following the initial battle of the Clone Wars, Sidious became extremely wary of Yoda, and even feared him when he discovered Yoda had dealt with Count Dooku one-on-one. And today, we're going to open up another holocron and discuss why Yoda's skill with the lightsaber gave Sidious pause for concern. Notoriously, Darth Sidious is on record saying that the Sith had grown beyond lightsabers, a sentiment that he passed on to Vader following Order 66. Many interpreted this as Darth Sidious simply being too powerful to ever need a lightsaber. This, however, is not entirely accurate. Sidious is extremely powerful in the Force, so much so that he even prefers to fight with it since that's his personal perception of true strength. But Sidious still uses a lightsaber and has been shown to enjoy himself when engaging in blade-to-blade combat. In the Lords of the Sith novel, Sidious was quite liberal with his use of the lightsaber, using it to cut down a bunch of beasts native to Ryloth, and almost used it to slaughter a young girl. Sidious also decided to give himself a challenge by using 2 lightsabers against the Zabrak brothers of Maul and Savage, rather than keep a free hand available to use the Force. And in the canon Son of Dathomir comics, Sidious engaged Maul and Mother Talzin with his lightsaber in hand. Many believe that Palpatine uses a lightsaber merely to mock the Jedi, but in all of these scenarios, there were no Jedi around to mock, and he simply used his lightsaber because he wanted to. Sidious does believe in lightsaber combat, and still respects the art of the warrior to a certain extent. His statement about the Sith having grown beyond lightsabers was not one to be taken in the literal sense, but in the philosophical and idealistic sense. If we look at the context of this famous quote, he was trying to teach Vader a lesson, trying to break him from his obsessive nature of hunting down Jedi, telling him that it was altogether unnecessary, and why Vader's continued focus on combat was a waste of time with the blade. And the Jedi Order was not only gone, but humiliated. Sidious wanted to see the Jedi wallow in their suffering while witnessing the galaxy they loved be ruled by their true greatest enemy. To him, this was the ultimate revenge. He had no need for lightsabers, armies, or Sith warriors, even battle strategy. The Sith had evolved and grown beyond their ancestry. Palpatine accomplished what his predecessors could not, and he had totally destroyed the Jedi Order. It was now that the Sith were to focus on their own pursuits and the pursuits of the dark side, leaving the Jedi behind them so that one day the Sith could grow into gods. But none of this meant that Sidious ever thought he was too strong for lightsabers. At least not yet. The most important thing to note is that all of these statements and philosophy came after the rise of the Empire and after Palpatine succeeded, so he still very much cared about his lightsaber skill during the Clone Wars era. Otherwise, he wouldn't have bothered to hide one of them in a statue within his office, and the other hid meticulously up his sleeve. In reality, Sidious believed himself to be so powerful at the blade that no one could challenge him, and he relished in the idea of making the Jedi watch as he completely overmatched them. This was until he met Dooku. Of course, Palpatine had heard all about Dooku's skill in the lightsaber. It fascinated Sidious that a rogue Jedi specialized in Makashi and still vehemently believed in the old ways of Force-sensitive combat. Sidious had trained Maul as an assassin. He was an animal with the blade who trained only to kill. Dooku was not brutish like Maul, and appreciated methodically taking down his opponent while using all of the cunning tactics that he held. He fought in a way that completely demoralized his enemy, and let them know how far out of the league they truly were when his lightsaber was activated. Sidious appreciated this. It was an ancient Sith technique of duel mach, which is the act of breaking down an opponent psychologically during the duel to make them weaker. This was usually accomplished through insults, mockery, and belittling speech while administering a healthy dose of force persuasion. But of course, it could also be done without words, but rather proof of skill, and Dooku did both. At first, Sidious saw Dooku's obsession with the blade as a waste of time, but he slowly grew to be delighted by it once he saw how it actually brought Dooku closer to the dark side. For Sidious, the dark side is the ultimate goal. Nothing is worth pursuing if it didn't give you more power, or at least more understanding of the Force, and it didn't matter what form that came in. Alchemy, sorcery, greed, or battle, as long as it brought one deeper into the darkness, and Sidious appreciated this. Palpatine would at one point even go as far to believe that Dooku was the finest duelist of the era, someone that could contend with even himself maybe. But eventually, he would come to be actually intimidated and even threatened by Dooku. That admission that the Count could possibly pose a challenge to one such as himself made him wary and concerned over Dooku's rapidly growing power. He already had plans in the works to deal with him once Anakin was ready to be harvested for the dark side. And that's when we come to the Battle of Geonosis. As expected, Dooku just steps over Anakin and Obi-Wan, but when Yoda arrived on the scene and the battle with the Sith Lord led to a stalemate, we actually learned through some of the Legends novels that this shocked Palpatine. Palpatine had no idea that such an old Jedi Master could have that kind of power or skill. Not only had Sidious been laboring under the assumption that he outclassed Yoda by another tier entirely, but he didn't believe that any Jedi had the capacity to match the modern Sith at all. Palpatine had to completely reevaluate his stance and approach to dealing with Yoda when the grand plan unfolded. As such, we notice that Sidious barely has anything to do with Yoda all during the Clone Wars, and largely steered clear of him. This is important because Sidious found a way to dwindle down the numbers of Jedi during the war by setting traps and killing as many as possible, if not nothing more than to stroke the veil of darkness that was clouding the Jedi's vision. Sidious would especially set multiple traps for Kenobi, one of the most infamous of these being the planet of Zygula, but we notice that Sidious hardly ever set a trap for Yoda personally. In fact, in Dark Rendezvous, it was largely Dooku who was the mastermind behind a lot of the schemes in order to kill Yoda. This was not only because of Yoda's apparent skill and power, but also because of his wisdom and gift of perception. After the duel on Geonosis specifically, Sidious treaded very carefully around the Grand Master. Out of all of them, Yoda was the most in tune with the Force, and although his vision was blinded like the rest, Yoda was still able to sense when the Force was shifting. Palpatine believed that of any of the Jedi, if Yoda held his ear close enough to the Force, something would eventually reveal itself. This is why Sidious would always work through either Dooku or Grievous with dealing with Yoda, especially when the opportunity presented itself. But it also changed how Sidious decided to approach their duel in Revenge of the Sith when it finally happened. On Coruscant, Yoda confronts Sidious, who decides to surprise the old master with one of the strongest blasts of Force lightning that he can conjure, hoping to catch him off guard before the duel ever commences. Yoda, though, managed to get up and hit Sidious with a Force push that flung him across the room, in the way no other Force wielder had ever touched him with the Force. No one since Plagueis had anyone even so much as broken his Force shield. We often talk about how Yoda found himself to be overmatched in the final duel, but what should also be said is that Sidious was shocked at just how truly powerful Yoda was. The idea that he was certainly a match for him, and something that jeopardized the entire Purge operation. This is why Sidious makes a mad dash for the exit, trying to lure Yoda into a tight hallway where his Ataru would be weakest. Without suitable enough room to move, Sidious was confident that he could take Yoda down easily. But of course we know that Yoda was too fast and forced Sidious to fight him on even ground. So now, it is time to test himself truly. Sidious ignites his blade and tries his absolute best, but soon he cackles of glee, feeding off of the anger he feels in Yoda. But this glee turns to snarls. Sidious is met with another terrifying revelation. He is unable to pin down Yoda and unable to smash through his defenses. The reality sets in. Yoda is too good for him at the lightsaber. For years, Palpatine had been concerned about this very moment and had been doing his best to figure out a workaround and not have to face Yoda directly. But of all the plans, this one fell and came crashing down when he had to admit that this Jedi Master was his true rival. And this would be why Darth Sidious took them up in the Senate debate hall, where he retreated away from Yoda and put his lightsaber away. At least he was confident that he was superior in terms of raw Force power. which of course he was correct. But anyway, my friends, this is the evolution of how Sidious felt about Yoda and Yoda's lightsaber combat over the course of the Clone Wars, how he came to realize that no Jedi rivaled him, but then ultimately got to the point where he felt he would lose. But what did you think of this? What are your thoughts on Sidious believing that Dooku was more powerful than Yoda until they dueled? Thank you as always, my friends, so much for visiting the channel today, and may the Force be with you.